September 1, 1983, at the break of dawn. Unable to suppress utter shock, people the world over were stunned at the appalling and dismaying tragedy. They were incredulous. How could such a disaster have occurred? This has got to be the height of atrocity and the dastardly barbarity of communism.
Fired upon a
Korean Airlines Flight 007, carrying 269 passengers and crew, was shot down by a missile from a Soviet jet fighter in the open skies over Sakhalin. Amid the maelstrom of outrage reporting by news media all over the world about the calamity of the Soviet attack on a civil airliner, the Korean government expressed not a word of protest to the USSR, but just stared dumbfounded at their neighboring countries. At that time, the KARP student organization, originally founded as part of the Victory Over Communism VOC movement, which had chapters in all 50 states of the United States, launched a nationwide campaign, holding rallies all over America to condemn the callous, brutal massacre in the skies. Moreover, fellow Koreans living in every nation around the world, together with peace-loving citizens all over the free world, gathered in front of Soviet embassies to hold demonstrations in condemnation and censure of their murderous atrocity, and demanded an inquest to get to the bottom of the crime. In addition, from among the 82 countries comprising the communist world, 250 news agencies representing 60 nations sent condolences and made statements condemning the Soviet Union and published news reports castigating the USSR. Particularly in the United States, the top newspapers and news media reported on KARP's activities as a grassroots movement. A full-page article appeared in the Washington Post reporting at length on our KARP protest rallies in front of the U.S. Capitol and the United Nations headquarters. It played a decisive role in laying the groundwork for the re-election of President Ronald Reagan, who upheld a firm policy in relation to the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, at home here in Korea, accompanied by the inconsolable shrieking and wailing of the victims' families, and the unrestrainable, wild outrage of all our citizens, labor unions throughout Korea launched protest rallies day in and day out in condemnation of the Soviet Union.
A defenseless civilian aircraft without provocation.
There was absolutely no justification, either legal.
On September 6th, after U.S. President Reagan aired the voice recordings confirming the deliberate downing of KAL 007 by the Soviet Union, the Korean government issued its response and, albeit late, convened an emergency council meeting which prepared an official statement delivered to the United Nations and international organizations in every nation of the world. The current Politburo and military leaders of the USSR appeared inept and divided in their response to the KAL downing incident. Conflicts erupted as they sought where to lay the blame. Amid this turmoil, Gorbachev was appointed the new General Secretary. In an effort to overcome the contradictions of communism, he pushed for the reforms of perestroika and glasnost. Finally, on December 25th, 1991, he proclaimed the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Behind the scenes, and largely unknown to people, Reverend Sun Myung-moon and Dr. Hak Ja-han-moon were making an enormous public contribution through their efforts to save humankind and realize a world of peace by particularly supporting and encouraging our CARP organization to expand its brisk and lively activities. By founding the Washington Times newspaper in 1982, Reverend Sun Myung-moon influenced President Reagan's policy and played a core role in laying the foundation for the Reagan doctrine of putting strong pressure on those countries that supported communism.
It isn't always easy. It wasn't easy when the paper's founder, Dr. Moon, first began the Washington Times.
Moreover, in spring of 1983, the Reagan administration pushed for the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, also known as the Star Wars strategy, by placing satellites in orbit capable of intercepting intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, with nuclear warheads. The Soviet Union was forced to step up its military budget, and the severe economic competition upset the international balance of power and led to the collapse of the USSR. At this critical time, there were those who were displeased with the activities Reverend Moon was conducting in every nation. Groups that defamed him, stuck him with false charges of tax evasion for which he was imprisoned. Yet Reverend Moon showed no hatred toward his adversaries. Rather, he loved and served them. While others were suffering in prison, he was not troubled. During his short term, he set an example of dutifully doing his duties, such as cleaning the kitchen, and even initiated many important projects. Notably, in the year 1985, while yet in prison, Reverend Sun Myung-moon convened the second Professors World Peace Academy, PWPA, convention. He set the leading theme of the international conference as the collapse of the Soviet Empire. At that time, the vigor of the Soviet Union was at its peak. In that circumstance, Reverend Moon sent Professor Morton Kaplan of the University of Chicago to the podium and had him declare the end of communism. It goes without saying that the communists themselves, particularly in the Free World camp, suffered a staggering blow. And 6 years later, in April 1990, Reverend Sun Myung-moon and Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon came to Moscow in the heart of the Soviet Union, accompanied by distinguished world news media figures, where they held the 11th World Media Conference right in Moscow, Russia. 600 journalists from all over the world, along with leaders of 41 nations, gathered, and at that forum, instead of speaking polite and ambiguous words, Reverend Moon delivered a powerful message without pulling any punches.
무엇보다도 무신론에 입각한 공산주의의 위협은 가장 심각하며 이 시간에도
As a result, Party Secretary Gorbachev met for a historical private one-on-one talk with Reverend Moon in the heart of the Kremlin Palace. At their private meeting, Reverend Moon spoke face-to-face with Gorbachev, top General Secretary of the Communist Party of the USSR, which had committed untold atrocities against religions, that if the General Secretary thought carrying out his glasnost and perestroika reforms was enough, it was not sufficient. Love itself is the only thing that could work. He must believe and trust in God. No one else could have said those words to him with a straight face and dignified demeanor. After a stunned moment, Gorbachev's face broke into a smile, and then he opened up and shared frankly with Reverend Moon. What's more, the two leaders went on to discuss many things, concluding the meeting with the party secretary's agreement to send 3,000 Soviet youth to America, where they would receive special education, and knowing the values of democracy and freedom, they would step forth in their country's hour of crisis. With his deep prescience and penetrating prophetic foresight, already at that time, Reverend Moon saw clearly that 1 year later, there would be a political dissatisfaction within the military leadership, and they would stage a coup d'etat. Then there were strong hints from Soviet official news sources that the Republic of Korea and the Soviet Union could restore diplomatic relations within a year. News media around the world eyed this with widely divided editorial responses. Reverend Moon's address on April 20th was aired in a special television documentary. Reverend Sun Myung Moon played a leading role in the fact that 6 months later, on September 30th, 1990, Gorbachev would meet with President Roh Tae-woo in San Francisco for the historic Korean-Soviet talks and establish ties between the two countries for the first time in 86 years. Immediately after that, Reverend Moon gave Dr. Jun Ho-suk the urgent direction to bring 3,000 Soviet students to the United States and give them special education. He stressed, by all means, you must accomplish this within 1 year. Because up to that time, each year only 7 or 8 American and Soviet students did exchanges. To bring 3,000 people was far beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Under ceaseless surveillance and scrutiny of the Soviet KGB, American CIA, and other national intelligence agencies, 3,500 people were dispatched to a total of 27 educational seminars, concluding successfully in August 1991. Then what do you suppose happened? On August 18th, just a couple days after the whole education program finished, the first military coup d'etat in Soviet history was staged. Top officials and military leaders revolted against Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika reforms, and tanks poured into the heart of downtown Moscow like a flood to suppress the crowds and bring them under control. But the coup d'etat miraculously lasted only 3 days. The 3,000 students educated by Reverend Sun Myung Moon in his wisdom were empowered with a new hopeful vision for the future, took courage, and formed a human shield as one body together with the citizens. Later on, the Soviet government publicly stated that the main reason the coup was overthrown was because of Reverend Moon, and made it clear that if it had not been for the 3,000 youth educated by Reverend Moon, the Soviet Union would have regressed to the era of Stalin. In such a way, Reverend Sun Myung Moon carried out numerous feats no nation could have accomplished, and left behind many achievements no one else in the world could have done. Without raising guns or swords, without firing any missiles, he dismantled communism and ushered in peace. Reverend Sun Myung Moon already foresaw that a year later, a military coup would take place, and issued the nearly impossible direction to educate 3,000 students at once. In consequence of the failed coup, on December 21st of the same year, the presidents of the 3 nations of Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine signed a public document agreeing to dissolve the Soviet Union. And on the 25th, Christmas Day, Mikhail Gorbachev announced his resignation as president of the USSR, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics disappeared forever into the annals of history. After that, having resigned from the office of president, Mikhail Gorbachev came to visit Reverend Sun Myung Moon at his residence in Hanam-dong, where Reverend Moon advised him to offer traditional Korean bows of appreciation to true parents and to strive to advance God's providence. And he would not die, but would come to know true love.
We'll live forever!
Now the nations of Russia and Eastern Europe have all changed over to the democratic system, and China and Vietnam have opened up. But during the last 40 to 50 years, the International Federation for Victory Over Communism, IFVOC, founded in January 1968, has stood fast as a firm bastion in an intense, death-defying struggle, facing the constant threat of war with the forces of communism. In Japan, likewise, when there was chaos on Japanese university campuses due to very strong communist influence, Reverend Sun Myung Moon sent Japanese missionaries and members into those furnaces. He encouraged them, saying that though they might risk their lives, they could also bring great success. Victory Over Communism, VOC, had 300 chapters all around the world. Our members stood up courageously, even though they might be made a laughingstock or worse. Particularly in Latin America, the Causa movement started, received enthusiastic, passionate support from the population and civic leaders, and made historical accomplishments in many countries wherever they worked. Founded on the conviction that only if families are happy and united can the local community, district, and nation live in peace, this faith constitutes the core of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, our true parents, seek to establish true families by establishing schools which promote character education. Even with all the countless good works of the unification movement for the sake of saving humankind and realizing a world of peace, if the family breaks down, the nation will also crumble. Therefore, the International Educational Foundation worked in Russia and all the former Soviet republics to spread a revolutionary character education program under the name Moamir Iya. This was widely used in consultation with education ministries, as well as in many schools, cities, districts, and republics. There were textbooks titled Character Education, Pure Love, Instilling True Family Values, Model for Peace, and other manuals and workbooks. In these and so many other ways, the movement is continuously working to build the world of the culture of heart on all fronts by cultivating citizens of talent, proclaiming the vision and teachings of Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon through all sorts of educational activities. In 1991, Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon went to Pyongyang together and met personally with Premier Kim Il-sung to discuss the challenging issue of reunification. With kind and warm-hearted love in the commonality of our Korean people, they delivered a message of world peace centered on the Korean peninsula and offered a proposal of support for North-South unification, cultural exchange, and a common open free trade zone. Inter-Korea summit talks were held. Separated family reunions were arranged. Inter-Korean economic cooperation agreements were signed, and the road to cultural interchange was opened. All these and other positive steps were enabled in large part by the meeting of Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Kim Il-sung. Moving right along, in October 1994, we began to pioneer the People's Republic of China on the foundation of collaboration with the Education Ministry of Mongolia, and many projects began using various approaches. Upon receiving consent from the Chinese government, About 250 consecutive seminars were held for Communist Party officials and cadets of the police academy. Even the Chinese educational officials were inspired and responded very favorably, so that about 30 large-scale blessing events were conducted in China. On May 29, 1999, Dr. Hak Ja Han-moon gave a historic talk in the Great Hall of the National People's Congress of China. With the convention center packed to overflowing, Dr. Hak Ja Han-moon delivered the speech, "The Path That Humankind Must Go," in which she recommended to the leaders of the People's Republic the values of true love as the foundation for the vision of world peace. The educational contents centered around Reverend Sun Myung Moon's and Dr. Hak Ja Han-moon's core teachings: becoming a person of true character, pure love guidance for adolescents, the pillars of true love and true family, all in all, the concepts of the culture of peace. When the Mongolian president received Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Ja Han-moon's program, he set out to instill these values of virtue in all the Mongolian people. He envisioned that the merits of the Mongolian culture itself would contribute to world peace, urged that the nation establish a model of education with core true family education to inculcate filial piety and family love, and had such programming broadcast by national television and all the media. Such public activities and witnessing continue to this day in Mongolia. The Family Federation for World Peace and Unification has been working for interfaith harmony and reconciliation since the 1960s, and conducting various activities transcending religions and denominations. Particularly in the wake of the appalling 9/11 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in New York, we have been taking strong initiatives toward interreligious tolerance and understanding. In its efforts to bring about peace in the Middle East, the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification appealed to prominent figures in each religious faith to establish the Peace UN, and patterned after this model, to appoint leaders in the fields of politics, religion, culture, education, media, business, science, diplomacy, and human rights as peace ambassadors in each country to accelerate and enliven projects and initiatives for peace all around the world. Reverend Sun Myung Moon lived the entire 93 years of his life under a ceaseless barrage of misunderstanding and slander. Yet his words of prayer and his urging to us were always, "Let us go forward to build the world of peace and unification. Let us not hate, but rather embrace one another with love. Let us inaugurate a peaceful world based on the pattern of priceless family happiness." Among the admonitions that Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Ja Han-moon constantly imparted were that children must no longer starve in our world, so that mothers and fathers won't suffer the heartache of losing their children. And we must not be negligent in raising them in true family values. Then the family will be overflowing with love and joy. Crying out for a harmonious and peaceful world brimming with love. Observing wisdom and patience in the face of the nuclear menace of the North, while South Korea is divided between progressive and conservative parties. The blessed families of Chanilgu are advancing toward the heavenly unified world of the future. The heavenly garden of Chunwon is transforming from one day to the next.
사랑하는 축복가정 여러분, 만나게 되어 정말 반갑고 감사합니다. 천진 참부님을 통해 내리신 천이 여러분과 함께하십니다.
The peaceful ideal world, finally united with all borders and barriers done away with. One family of humankind under God. Such is the world the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification is ultimately striving for.
여기 모인 여러분,
All of you
나와
gathered
하나
here
되어
together,
세계로
I hope that you will go
세상의
out to
등불이
all the
되어
world united
어두운
with me,
세상을 밝히며
guided by God's
하나님의
heart,
품으로
and become lighthouses to shine
인도하는
unto this
여러분
dark
모두가
world.
되기를 바랍니다.
For this world we live in to attain peace, not just to obtain material prosperity while the original image of the human being is corrupted. For the world that God so longs for to be realized, the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification insists that we cherish and love one another, praying and holding these words close to our hearts. All of us are truly committed to go forth to accomplish and bring victory. We will absolutely bring in a fruitful harvest.